$17.40. In Kansas, that's the only line between surviving the winter and freezing to death on the streets. Summer had claimed her father's life. Her uncle had fled west with the last of her money, leaving her alone in a strange land. No family, no home. The dilapidated attic room would officially throw her out onto the streets at the end of this week. Stepping onto the barren 4-mile road eastward, Anna cast aside her hopes. She sought refuge with a sullen widower. Unbeknownst to her, the place she was about to enter was not a safe haven. The man she sought shelter from was, in fact, on the brink of collapse, burdened by insurmountable debt and a deadly frost about to sweep through. Two wounded souls patched together. Could a seemingly weak and penniless immigrant girl save a home she didn't even belong to? 4 miles of road stretched across barren fields. The Kansas sky was a vast, empty, stark blue. A sky that could easily swallow the faint-hearted, but Anna dared not look up. She fixed her gaze on the road, straining to pull the handcart toward the mound ahead. Cedar Bend appeared, nothing like a prosperous harbor. The main wooden house was weathered and faded by the sun and wind. The barn roof had crumbled, and the north fence had tilted after the storm the previous night. The man who came out to greet her didn't enter through the front door of the house, but from the stable. Eli Ward, in his 30s, broad-shouldered and taciturn. His face bore the deep furrows of someone accustomed to living by the weather, rather than by understanding people's hearts. He stopped a few steps away from her, his voice low and husky. "Did you walk here?" Anna straightened her back, hiding her hands, which were bleeding from gripping the wooden handle behind her coat. It's a clear road. Silence fell between the two strangers, not a word of polite pity. Eli looked at the deserted road behind her, then silently walked forward, taking the handle of the cart without asking permission. Eli's house was impeccably clean, yet devoid of the warmth of life. That neatness inadvertently betrayed a silent wound. An empty women's armchair, a candle long since gone out, yet still held on the windowsill, like a desperate relic of his deceased wife. And on the dark staircase, a pair of wary, childlike eyes stared intently at her. The boy named Ben didn't utter a word of greeting. He looked at Anna as if she were another ghost about to enter, then cruelly vanish from his life. Eli didn't force his son to speak. He pointed to the small room. "Food, lodging, and wages will be paid in cash after the harvest is over. I promise nothing else. No promises of shelter, no vision of a future." Between them there was only work, boundaries, and the straightforwardness of the West.
I know. I heard the shot.
Before leaving, Eli's boots paused at the doorway. He left behind a statement filled with the pressure of survival. "The wheat and supplies are dwindling. We must move everything into the cellar before the frost arrives." Looking out at the fields bending under the cold wind, Anna realized a harsh truth. This place was not a safe haven. If the weather changed and the harvest failed, this house, that taciturn man, and she herself would all perish from the coming winter. Outside, the sky was still thick with the gray of dawn. Anna didn't wait for the homeowner to wake up or give orders. Driven by her ingrained survival instinct, she stepped into the icy cold kitchen and lit the first fire herself. The flickering firewood illuminated the depleted state of the house. Only a corner of the cornmeal bag remained. The small amount of salted pork wrapped in thin cloth was almost gone, and the coffee at the bottom of the tin would only last a week if she were truly frugal. Eli went down to the kitchen. He offered no words of thanks or praise. The pride of a man from the West, accustomed to solitude, wouldn't allow him to utter any soft words. But he silently picked up the glass and drained it, accepting the care as something obvious and necessary. Last night's wind blew down 2 sections of the north fence, he said, breaking the silence in the house. I need you to bring lunch to the fields, if you can manage. Anna didn't stop tidying up, replying with a calm and firm tone. I can manage. But hidden beneath the peaceful exterior of the kitchen, Anna inadvertently uncovered a cruel truth tucked under the edge of the ledger. A debt collection letter from the town's general store. The words, "Payment after the harvest," were a silent threat. In that moment, everything became clear. Cedar Bend's obstacle wasn't just the freezing cold. Under this roof lay a massive debt awaiting execution. This farm wasn't just short of workers, it was dying. By midday, as they carried their food to the fields, the picture of their livelihood revealed even more clearly the death sentence hanging over their heads. The northern rows of crops remained unharvested. The heavy ears of grain were ready to collapse and rot if heavy rain came. The 2 hired men chewed their bread with the indifference of those without obligations. They would leave at the end of the week, and Eli had absolutely no money left to pay anyone else extra. Anna watched silently. She looked at the color of the soil. She counted the unfinished cuts. The northwest sky suddenly turned a sickening bluish gray, like the color of an old bruise about to bleed. The wind shifted, lashing a biting cold air against Anna's left cheek. She recognized the scent of nature's wrath before any of the men present could utter a word. A violent storm was brewing if they couldn't save the last row of plants and protect the food storage tonight. Then this place she had just hoped to call home would be wiped off the map forever. When nature rages, Western men instinctively choose to protect their horses and tools. It's a matter of instinct. But Anna didn't wait for orders. She cast aside the reservations of a lodger and plunged into protecting the most fragile lifeblood of the house. With decisive, unforced movements, she gathered 3 trays of dried herbs, drying on the windowsill, hastily pulled the linen cloth from the railing, and carried 2 heavy buckets of water into the kitchen. The light outside had turned a deathly yellow at the edges of the clouds. In the safe confines of the kitchen, Anna suddenly remembered something vital. She had propped open the door of the root cellar behind the house this morning for ventilation. It was Cedar Bend's lifeline. If the rain poured down on the cellar, all the pumpkins, turnips, and potatoes stored for the winter would rot. They would starve. She rushed outside, facing the raging storm. The moment the iron bars across the hatch were slammed shut, the first raindrops poured down. They were large, warm, and heavy, rain that tore through the sky, heralding a great flood. Eli turned back inside, standing silently in the hallway. He looked at her. No empty words of thanks were spoken. Western men don't express their gratitude verbally, but in that astonished gaze, a facade had crumbled. He realized this penniless immigrant girl didn't need rescuing. She had just saved the life of this farm. 4 people sat around the kitchen table, isolated in the gray rain. The house began to speak. The flat, rhythmic drumming of the kitchen roof, the sharp clatter of the makeshift corrugated iron roofing, and a deep, resonant echo from deep beneath the wooden floorboards. Anna sat in the corner, listening silently. She was learning to understand the secret languages of this house, harmonizing with its every breath. In that eerie silence, the two hired hands simply gulped down their black coffee without a word of inquiry, while Eli continuously twirled the tin cup on the table. But the peace in the kitchen was only a fleeting lie. When the storm had passed and given way to silence, Eli's hoarse voice asked about the cornfield to the north. Anna already knew the answer before she went outside. Looking through the crack in the window, half of the wheat field, heavy with grain, their only hope of paying off the grocery debt, lay flat, buried in the mud, awaiting decay. They had just saved their winter meal, but were about to lose their entire livelihood. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cruel reality exposed in the pale light of the setting sun. The northern wheat field, the last hope of paying off the grocery debt, now lay flat in the deep mud. Two hired hands stood leaning on their hoes, spitting onto the ground. To them, this crop was dead. In a few more days, it would mold, crack, and become worthless. Eli stood silently, his jaw tightened, bearing the weight of a helpless choice. Abandoning this crop to salvage what remained standing meant accepting the loss of the farm for the winter. But Anna didn't return to the warm kitchen. She bent down, touching the earth, feeling the dryness of the wind and the firmness of the unbroken grains of rice. Memories of the long, rainy seasons in Württemberg with her late father resurfaced. She knew this land could still be saved if they were brave enough to break the rules. Cut now, before the sun cracks the grain, she suggested. Bundle them into smaller bundles, stand them upright on higher ground for ventilation, and use torn strips of old linen to temporarily tie up the weak stalks. A hired hand sneered. He thought a wild piece of land like Kansas had no place for agricultural lessons from a European girl. Anna remained silent. She didn't argue. She just looked at Eli. And in that fateful moment, the sullen landowner, it did something that would turn the entire order of the house upside down. He ignored the advice of the skilled worker and chose to gamble the life of Cedar Bend on the immigrant girl. They worked frantically until the sun bled on the horizon. Anna didn't just carry food or mend clothes. She plunged into the mud, her hands red and bleeding from the rice stalks, cutting through her skin. She showed them how to prop up the rice stalks so that the wind could pass through the gaps without rotting the roots. Eli followed her instructions in front of the hired workers. It was the most public and absolute recognition a Western man could give a woman. By the end of the day, a significant portion of the crop had been saved. Not enough to make them rich, but just enough to snatch a chance of survival from the clutches of death. Eli gazed at the result before him, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "You were right." Anna wiped the mud from her forehead, her eyes as still as a lake. The field had told us beforehand. That night, the walls of Cedar Bend seemed to have lost some of their chill. But as Anna was meticulously mending Ben's torn collar, the house's invisible child emerged from the shadows. He offered no thanks. He fixed his deeply wounded eyes on her and uttered a question that froze the surrounding space. "You will leave too, won't you?" The life of the field had been saved, but the specter of separation still suffocated the very breath of this house. You'll leave too, won't you?" The 9-year-old's question fell into the silent void, heavier than a stone. It exposed the bleeding wound of this house. A mother had left in death, and every new presence carried the curse of disappearance. Anna looked into those bewildered eyes. A shrewd woman would hastily make promises to soothe the child, but in the Wild West, empty promises were the cheapest thing. She continued to pierce the fabric with her needle, her voice calm and truthful. "Well, not tonight." It was a small, practical answer, but kind enough to reassure the child as she snuggled into her warm blanket. A few days later, Eli took Anna to Cedar Bend to buy nails, salt, and kerosene to stock up. The natural storm had receded, but another lurked in the crowd. In an age where a woman's honor was as fragile as paper, their arrival was like a spark thrown into a haystack. The eyes of the townspeople were as sharp as razor blades. A poor immigrant girl living under the same roof with a lonely widower. That was an unforgivable sin in the eyes of these hypocrites. They didn't care how she waded through the mud to save the crops. They only saw someone selling her honor for a place to live. Eli stood outside the shop. His ears were sharp enough to hear the gossip. His jaw clenched, his hands gripping the brim of his leather hat so tightly that his knuckles turned white. On the train ride home, Eli broke the silence. He didn't defend her with fists like he did in the pub. He offered to rent her a decent room in town until the harvest was over. It was the desperate protection of a man running out of money, but willing to spend his last penny to preserve the dignity of the woman by his side. Anna understood his intentions, but she refused to be cast aside just to silence cowardly rumors. "I came to the farm to work," she said, her voice clear and distinct, cutting through the prairie wind. "Let them judge my work." She didn't need pity, nor did she need anyone to hide her. She wanted to claim her place with her own hands, stained with the blood of labor. But just when Anna thought she could finally take control of her own destiny amidst the town's rumors, the ghosts of the past knocked on her door. On the familiar kitchen table, a thin envelope, yet one that carried 1,000 pounds, awaited her. It was sent from the West. The sender's name was Anna's uncle. The man who had abandoned her in the midst of a sickly summer now reached out from the depths of despair to reclaim what belonged to his bloodline. The letter from her uncle arrived after weeks of silence. Far in the West, his silver mining dreams had been shattered. Now, with his pockets empty, he remembered the niece he had heartlessly abandoned in the sweltering summer heat. The dry words held no familial affection. He ordered her to go to the West to serve his group of miners or return the last of her father's money. To him, Anna was not a person of her own accord. She was merely a burden, a dependent asset, to be summoned and discarded at any time. A frail woman would collapse and weep, but Anna hid her pain deep in her eyes. She continued working. She checked the last jars of flour, rearranged the root cellar, and noted every last grain of salt left in the house. Eli knew of the letter's existence. He noticed her unusual silence. But men of the West don't intrude on another's grief without permission. He simply said, "If you need to go into town to send a reply, I'll buy a horse." Absolute respect. He didn't ask, didn't hold, and didn't pry. That night, in the cold attic room, Anna counted her only possessions, $17.40. From the beginning of the story, this money had been her last resort. It was her train ticket to escape the barrenness of Kansas. But looking down at the ledger on her desk, she knew Cedar Bend was dying. The farm needed nails, wire, kerosene, and salt to withstand the cold. Without them, the barn would collapse, and the recently saved crop would be meaningless. She stood at a crossroads. Keep the money to escape, or empty her pockets to save a home that didn't bear her name. Anna chose to go down to the kitchen, but Eli refused. The pride of the gruff man wouldn't allow him to take away a woman's last escape route. "I won't take away the only thing that will get you out of here," he snarled, his eyes darkening with conflict. But Anna wouldn't give in. She wouldn't throw away the money out of weakness or pity. She pressed the coins down hard on the table, defiantly retorting, "Then don't take it. Let me choose where I put it." She wasn't sacrificing. She was investing in her own choice. For the first time in her life, Anna was giving up her right to escape, to claim her right to belong. At that moment, Anna thought her sacrifice had bought the farm a little time. But the Kansas land never tolerates the naive. The north wind suddenly changed direction in the night. The temperature plummeted. The condensation on the window panes began to freeze into icy streaks of ice. Frost, winter's deadliest weapon, didn't wait until the weekend. It descended right on their doorstep, ready to sever Cedar Bend's breath completely. Waking up that morning, Cedar Bend was enveloped in a deathly silence. The cold didn't wait until the weekend. It was already biting. The north wind blew dry and sharp as a knife. The horses in the stable stamped their feet in panic. With the instincts of a girl raised in the fields, Anna knew frost would fall tonight. And as an inevitable consequence of the harsh west, disaster rarely comes alone. Nature's fangs were bared, and people immediately fled. One hired hand packed up and left upon hearing of a lucrative job in town. The other hesitated, fearing that if tonight's harvest failed, he wouldn't receive a single penny from his debt-ridden landowner. Eli was pushed against the wall. The pressure crushed his broad shoulders. The wheat field wasn't harvested. The barn door hinges were broken. The granary wasn't fenced off. And a grocery debt loomed large. To shoulder all that work alone before sunset was unthinkable. Eli felt as though he had lost his entire estate. But at his darkest moment, Anna stepped up. She didn't panic. She didn't complain. With the nails, wire, and kerosene she'd bought with her last pennies, Anna began to re-establish her survival order. "You and that fellow go to the field and finish harvesting the last of the rice," she ordered, her voice firm, leaving no room for refusal. "Ben and I will take the pumpkins into the cellar, prepare hot bean soup and coffee for the night shift." For the first time, the house's invisible child was given a real task. Anna didn't hide Ben under the blankets for weak protection. She gave him the lantern, tasked him with keeping the light at the cellar door, and counting each crate of turnips being lowered down. Seeing how Anna coordinated the work, the gruff man was stunned. Eli realized this house was no longer his solitary fortress. It was being run by two adults working together. But fate was not easily swayed by human effort. As night fell, a frost, accompanied by a raging storm, swept across the farm. A terrifying cracking sound ripped through the night. The west stable door had come off its hinges. If the stable collapsed, all the seeds, tools, and the lives of the livestock would be crushed. Darkness descended. The lamp in the child's hand flickered, as if about to go out. The final battle for survival had officially begun. The frosty night descended, bringing with it the breath of death. The water in the stables, already crusted over, was shattered by the wind. The west stable door, the last shield protecting the livestock, the grain storehouse, and all their survival tools, had come loose from its hinges. If it collapsed, Cedar Bend would lose everything. Eli rushed out into the storm, using his broad back to try and pry open the massive door. But human strength was insignificant against the wrath of nature. In that critical moment, Anna didn't cower and run away. She pushed Ben inside, slammed the door shut, and gave the child a life-or-death task: guard the stove and keep the coffee pot hot. Then, she grabbed a roll of wire, a bag of nails, and charged straight into the eye of the storm. From the kitchen, the 9-year-old child stood on tiptoe and placed a brightly burning candle on the windowsill. That candle was no longer a relic mourning her deceased mother. Tonight, it was the only lighthouse, the guiding light leading the adults back home. Outside the stable, 3 people struggled against the storm. Eli held the door. The hired hand bolted it. Anna wrapped wire around the broken hinges, tightening it. They no longer distinguished between master and servant, male and female. They were warriors, fighting for every breath of this roof. Even with the stable door secured, Anna didn't collapse. She was exhausted, but she meticulously checked each damp bundle of wheat, determined not to let it pile up too deep to prevent mold. And Eli, the proud landowner, completely obeyed her judgment. Dawn broke. Frost blanketed the edges of the grass, but Cedar Bend stood firm. Not rich, not perfect, but they had survived the winter. In the warm kitchen, the battle for survival had ended, giving way to another battle, a battle of choices and self-respect. Eli placed Anna's wages on the table, full and fair. He even paid her extra for the nails and kerosene she had used. "If you wish to leave," his voice hoarse, "I will saddle you up and take you to town and write a decent certificate so you can find new work." It was the ultimate sacrifice of a man from the West. He longed for her to stay. He knew this house needed her, but he chose to give her freedom, refusing to use entrapment or gratitude to confine a woman. Anna looked down at the coins. She could easily gather them, add them to the money in the tin, and catch a train to leave this barren place forever. For the first time since being abandoned in Kansas, she held a real choice in her hands. She didn't answer Eli immediately. Her gaze slowly shifted from the pile of money and toward the windowsill where the old candle had burned down to its last drop of wax, just as it had on the first night she entered this house. After a frantic night of fighting for survival against death, the kitchen of Cedar Bend Farm was enveloped in an immeasurable silence. The 9-year-old child slept soundly in the armchair, his chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Outside, frost had blanketed the fields, but the shed was full, and the stable door stood firm. But for Eli, the greatest storm raged within him. He leaned against the doorframe, holding his breath, awaiting the decision of the woman who held the soul of this house in her hands. Anna touched the tattered letter in her pocket. It was the only letter she'd ever sent her sister that spring. In it, she'd written that Kansas was a barren land and Cedar Bend was just a temporary job to survive. She looked around the kitchen, the fire she'd lit herself, the wooden table where they'd hastily sipped coffee in the storm. The sewing basket was almost empty, and the child was sleeping peacefully. "I once wrote to my sister," Anna broke the silence, telling her that this place was just a job. Eli didn't approach. He maintained his respectful distance. His voice was low and hoarse, filled with patience. "No, and now, that's still what you want to tell your sister?" Anna made no vows or promises. In the harsh West, love wasn't proven with words. She walked to the windowsill. The remnants of a sad past had burned away. She placed a brand new candle in the tin holder and lit a brilliant flame. "No," she replied softly. Eli's lips trembled slightly. He looked at the new candle, then at her. "Koku, this morning the boy asked me if you would stay," Eli said. "I told him I didn't know, that only you had the right to answer." And Anna answered. She didn't gather the coins on the table. She returned to the counter, picked up the second tin cup, and placed it firmly on the wooden table, right in front of the man of her life. Anna chose to stay, not because she was penniless or had nowhere else to go. She chose to stay because she had shed blood to keep this home, and now she was completely free to choose where she belonged. A few weeks ago, A girl desperately tore a telegram from a wooden board simply because she had no home. Tonight she lights a new candle because she has built a home of her own with her own hands. Outside the window, the Kansas frost still stretches white, cold, and merciless. But inside, the fire still burns. The coffee is still hot, and two broken pieces have found each other. So they will never be alone again.